Alrighty, so the first question that I have is kind of the start to your life, how you ended up in Orthodoxy to begin with, and how you later on came into ROAC and the story behind that.
Okay, well, I was brought up a Roman Catholic in a Roman Catholic family. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. I lived with them, off and on different times. My grandfather was a third order Franciscan. That means he was a member of the Franciscan order. The first order is priests, the second order is nuns, and the third order is lay people that were married, but they were part of the Franciscan order. As such, he had a rule of prayer, which he did every night, and he always was reading about church things, and in those days they had brochures in the back of the churches about different topics, and that's pretty much all he read about and talked about. I decided to become a priest when I was 6 years old. My grandmother made little vestments for me. She bought oyster crackers and Welch's grape juice so I could play Mass. I put a sheet over her sewing machine, and my grandfather made a censer for me out of a Campbell's soup can, which he spray painted gold. And that's how I grew up. I decided to become, instead of going to high school with all the other kids, I went to a seminary. After the 8th grade, I went they ran their own high school at this seminary. It was in Massachusetts. But by then, Vatican II had hit, and they were changing everything. And to my way of thinking, they were doing things rather stupidly and was silly. Priests dressed up as clowns, masses with pizza and Pepsi Cola, beer and pretzels, cookies and milk, potato chips and Kool-Aid, playing guitars, singing Negro spirituals, stuff like that. I didn't like that. And I wasn't protesting or anything, it's just that I didn't like it, and they could see that in the seminary that I didn't like it. So after a year and a half of that, the rector came to me and told me that they wanted me to go home for Christmas break and not come back. And I said, well, what did I do wrong? And he said, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just that we need boys to go out into the parishes and bring young people into church, and you are not the material that we're looking for. We need somebody who's going to be popular with people and bring people to church, young people to church. All you want to do is sit around and pray all day. And I said, well, that's why I joined the Carmelite order. That's what I thought we were supposed to be all about. He said, no. That was in the old days. Now it's not like that anymore. So I said, well, if that's the way it is, then I'll go home today. I didn't wait until the end of, the semester. So, but when I got home, my parents were divorcing, and so at 15, my whole life was kind of crumbling. My family life, my religious life, which was really my whole life. For a while, I didn't know what to believe in, because I couldn't believe in Roman Catholicism anymore. The church was so crazy, all the crazy things they were doing. And I thought, if I'm going to be a Christian, I'm going to be a Catholic. I wasn't going to be a Protestant, and there was nothing else. As far as I knew, I'd never heard of Orthodoxy. But after a while, a friend of mine, when I was 18, I had a lady friend at work. She had an Italian woman with 7 kids, and she told me about this Ukrainian parish, and she said, I want you to go out there, and there are other people that are in the same boat as you. I know what your problem is. She said, there are other people that are suffering from the same thing. You go out to this Ukrainian church. And I said, well, first of all, what is a Ukrainian? Never heard of that. I didn't know what a Ukrainian was. And then I heard the word Catholic, and I said, no, I'm done with that stuff. And she said, no, I want you to go out there. So I finally did, and I liked it. It was beautiful. The Mass was reverent, and I saw the icons and the incense and the people singing and everything. when in a way it was all foreign to me, of course, because I was used to the Western way, or Latin rite. But I liked it, and so I started going to church every day for a while, and then they brought this priest over from Yugoslavia, one of the ladies in my city. Her father was a priest in Yugoslavia, which to me was a revelation because I didn't know Catholic priests could have families. But in the Eastern rites, they still did. So they came over, her father and mother, and her youngest brother, who was slightly older than me. So I gave him English lessons, and he gave me Ukrainian lessons for a while. And then I came to the attention of a Ukrainian priest in Chicago who wanted me to join he had this idea to make what they call an apostolate, which is a sort of a halfway between a religious order, and you're not really monastic, but they were lay people that needed more than the normal amount of church and wanted to do something a little extra, but not quite become a monastic or something like that. So they started these apostolate things. That was very common back in those days after Vatican II. They were playing around with the spirituality. And so he had me come up to Chicago. I was taking Ukrainian lessons. I was working on the Ukrainian newspaper there. And he presented me to the Ukrainian bishop in Chicago and asked him to sponsor me to go to Rome to study for the priesthood there so that I would come back and be a priest in his apostolate. That was the idea. But in the seminary in Rome, I thought I was finally going to get the real Roman Catholic religion, because in my first seminary with the Carmelites in Massachusetts, our Old Testament professor came in and told us, he basically went through the entire Old Testament and explained every miracle away like it was just nothing, like Adam and Eve were not really people like we know people today. They were some kind of an animal that at one point God just put a human soul into, but it's from this animal that both apes and humans evolved. And there were probably 500 pair of them, because you need that many in order to start a new species. He said things like he explained away all the miracles of Moses and the whole Old Testament. Basically, they had some kind of explanation for it, and they were really rather silly. But the impression that we got is that there was no truth to believe in. It's just whatever you think, whatever you like to think. And I thought once I got to Rome, I would finally get the nitty-gritty of what it meant to be the real Catholic religion. But it wasn't any better. The professors in Rome, I lived at the Ukrainian college, but we had to go to the Urbanianum for our lectures, which was one of the top 3 seminaries in the Roman Catholic world. There's the Angelicum, the Gregorianum, and the Urbanianum. I went to the Urbanianum. And there the professors were telling us things like the transfiguration of Christ is a myth, that the apostles were simple peasant fishermen without education, and maybe the Lord took these 3, Peter, James, and John, up on Mount Tabor for some reason, and maybe the sun was setting behind him, and it just seemed to them like the sun was coming out of his clothing and out of him. And in their simple peasant fisherman minds, they blew it all out of proportion, and the myth of the Transfiguration was born. Another day, the professor told us that the ever-virginity of the Mother of God is not true, that in the scriptures itself, it says that that the Lord had brothers and sisters, so that must mean that St. Joseph and the Mother of God had other children. But it's important only that Jesus was born from her when she was still a virgin, and he was the firstborn. That's all that mattered. They never explained to us that Saint Joseph had been married before, and his other children were from his first wife. That he was already 80 years old when he was asked to take the Mother of God into his home, and so on. They never explained any of those things. And then the day came when the professor told us that the resurrection of Christ was also doubtful. That in the opinion of our professor, the apostles came and took the body of Christ from the tomb before Pontius Pilate was able to put the guards there. But then he said something even more horrible than that, and that was that for us Catholics it didn't matter. It's nice to have this dogma of this teaching about the resurrection, but even without it, we can still exist as a church. Because our main job is to finish the work that Jesus Christ came to the earth to do, but wasn't able to finish it because the big bad Jews turned him into the big bad Romans who crucified him. But he, being God, knowing that was going to happen, he appointed the apostles with St. Peter at the head of them to finish his work on the earth of bringing paradise back to earth. So, yeah, it's not resurrection. It's like icing on a cake. It's nice to have it, but even without the icing, the cake still tastes pretty good. But the reason they were doing that, I think, is because they have archaeologists who are working to locate the bones of Jesus Christ. They're doing that because the Jews are also looking for the bones of Jesus Christ. And the Catholics are worried that the Jews will find them first and then discredit us. So they are already ready with an explanation. Well, we don't really need to have the resurrection, you see.
Yeah, kind of putting it down the whole
right
again.
Many years later, when I was already an Orthodox priest and they sent me to Rome to the Russian parish there, I used to go a lot to this one church of St. Lawrence, the Archdeacon of Rome, who was killed in the middle of the 3rd century. He was grilled to death on an army camp grill. They barbecued him to death. Anyway, I used to go over there a lot, and there was a priest there from Palo Alto, California, who was a Jesuit priest. He was working on the Papal Archaeological Committee. There was a catacombs at this church of St. Lawrence. It wasn't open to the public, but they were working in there to discover what was down there. And one time I came over and he said to me, "Oh, Father, you have to congratulate me." And I said, "Oh yeah, what's going on?" And he says, "Well, yes, I've gotten a promotion and I'm going to be going to Jerusalem." And I said, "Oh, how wonderful, your Father. Must be very interesting for somebody in your line of work, being an archaeologist." And he said, "Yes, I'm going to be taking part in the effort to find the bones of Christ." And then he sort of jabs me in the ribs and he says, let's hope we find them before the Jews do. His meaning being, if we find them first, we'll squirrel them away in the Vatican Library and nobody will ever be the wiser. But if the Jews find them first, they're going to make a lot of publicity about that and discredit our whole Christian religion, show that our Gospels are all fake and so on, and that Jesus Christ is just a man like anybody else and nothing more. And anyway, after I heard this in school, I just couldn't believe in this Roman Catholic religion anymore. But since I was with the Ukrainians, I wanted to know where the Ukrainians came from. And I heard this word Orthodox being thrown around a lot, that we used to be Orthodox and so on. And I said, well, who are these Orthodox? I started reading up about Orthodoxy. And I finally came to the conclusion that I had to become Orthodox. I hadn't spoken to anybody yet who was Orthodox. I just did it based on my reading and what they were telling me in the Roman Catholic schools. So who converted me to Orthodoxy? The Roman Catholics did. I went to my rector at the Ukrainian school and told him I wanted to go home. He said, don't you want to finish out the year first? And I said, no, I don't. I don't see any point in continuing this course of study in this school. I don't believe anything they're telling me. Everything they're telling me is a lie. And I think I have to rid it, get it out of my mind. Everything that they've taught me, I have to get rid of that. And he said, well, what are you going to do when you go home? I said, well, you asked me, so I'm going to tell you. I'm going to find the first Orthodox priest that I can find and get myself baptized and become Orthodox. And he slaps the table and he says, aha, I could tell, I could see that. I've been watching you and I could see that you were leaning in that direction. But I have to tell you something. I'm a priest of the Catholic Church, and I have to tell you that if you do that, when you die, you will go to the lowest pit in hell. And there will be absolutely no mercy for you, no chance of ever getting out of that. And I said to him, well, Father, if I stay Catholic, I have to maybe be under a bishop or serve together with some priest someplace who does not believe that the transfiguration really happened, that it's a myth, that the ever virginity of the Mother of God is a myth, that the resurrection of Christ is a myth. I think I'll take my chances with the Orthodox. And then he says, well, okay, you're not Ukrainian. You came to this because you're attracted to the outward, the beauty of the service and the icons and all that. It's kind of exotic for you. But let me float something past you here. Why don't you become Orthodox? Go home, become Orthodox. I agree. I recommend you become Orthodox. But don't break with us. Because you see, that's what the uniates are for anyway. Yeah. They're supposed to be, they're being used as bait so that the Orthodox can see that they can become Catholic and they can still believe and have everything that they are used to. The only thing they really have to do is take the name of the Pope for the liturgy instead of an Orthodox bishop. Everything else can stay the same. I said, no, I can't do that. I can't be double-minded like that. That's not honest. So I went back to my city, Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I was raised. And I looked in the yellow pages. I didn't even know if we had an Orthodox church in Fort Wayne or not. I found two, one Greek one and one Bulgarian one, and I thought, well, I know the Bulgarians are using Old Slavonic, which was what we were using in the Ukrainian church. And the Greeks, I didn't know Greek that well, and I thought, well, I'll go talk to the Bulgarian priest. So I go to talk to this Bulgarian priest, and he was actually in the row corps at that time, but he was clean shaven, short hair, Roman collar, black suit, pews in the church, organ in the church, serving on the new calendar. And he says to me, what can I do for you? And I said, well, Father, I just came back from Rome, and I was a student at a papal university there, and I have decided that Orthodoxy is the true religion, and I would like to become Orthodox. I would like you to baptize me. And he said to me, but why? Orthodoxy is just for Russians and Greeks and Bulgarians and, Serbians, people like that, Eastern Europeans. If you are of Western background, you have to be a Catholic or a Protestant. Don't worry, it doesn't matter. You can still go to heaven when you die. You can still be saved. It's just a cultural difference, that's all it is. And I said, no, I believe that the true Christian religion did not survive in the West, not just since Vatican II, but for the last 950 years. And he says, oh, I don't know. This never happened to me before. I don't know what to do with you. I'm going to have to talk to the bishop about this. You're going to have to read all these books. And I said, okay, well, let's get started, Oh, I don't know. Let me think about this. I'll get back to you. And I thought, okay, well, this guy's a dud. you know. I read about Orthodoxy. It's not supposed to be this way. So I thought, well, I'll go try another one, you know. I moved to Michigan with my job, and I went to this little town on Lake Michigan, facing Chicago, sort of. And I asked the Chamber of Commerce there, I said, do you have any Orthodox churches in town? They said, yeah, we have a Greek one and we have a Russian one. I said, well, let me have the address of the Russian one. So I go there. There's this little old priest who used to be a white officer in I think he was actually an officer in the Tsar's army. He could hardly speak English. So I asked him for a blessing. He grabbed me and hugged me like I was his long-lost grandson. And I said, Father, I want to become Orthodox. I want you to baptize me. And he says, oh, okay. Well, you come next Sunday and I will chrismate you. The bishop in Chicago, he says that we should baptize Catholics, but he's too strict. Catholics have valid baptism. And I was disappointed because I had read that this Russian church outside of Russia, when I was still in Rome, I had read that this church was the most conservative and most reactionary and most Orthodox of all the Orthodox jurisdictions. And that's why I chose that particular jurisdiction. And here I go to two of their priests, you know, from my perspective, and they're telling me I can't be baptized, that I've already been baptized by the Roman Catholics. So, but I thought at least he's willing to take me into the church. So I said, okay. And so he chrismated me. And then for about a year, I was going to church and reading a lot of stuff. I met some Russian people at this Bulgarian church. I moved back to my city and started going to this Bulgarian church. We had a Russian church in Fort Wayne, but no priest. So we were mostly going to this Bulgarian church for services. It was very modernistic, but I met some Russian people there that started giving me things to read, Orthodox Word, Orthodox Life, a lot of stuff that they had collected for their children who didn't really want to learn Russian, and so they were collecting a lot of stuff in English. I didn't know Russian at the time. And the lady of this family was an assistant Russian professor at the university, and she offered to give me Russian lessons for free. So I started studying Russian and reading all these Orthodox words and Orthodox lives. And after about a year, I decided I should probably become a monk. I was thinking about doing that since I was a kid, so now I'm in the Orthodox Church, I should probably think about that. And I thought, well, where do I go? Which place do I go to? I could go to Jordanville, but I don't speak Russian. I could go to Boston, but I don't like Greeky stuff. And they use some English, but I could go to Montreal. I could go to Platina, California. And then I thought, oh gosh, I don't know which one to go to. Well, how about if I go to all of them and then I decide which one I like, you know? So the first one on the list was Jordanville. So I go to Jordanville and speak to a priest there. He took me to see Archbishop Averki. And Ludwika Averki told him to take me and baptize me because I was improperly received. He said to me, don't think you haven't been Orthodox. You're Orthodox. You're in the church. It's just that there's a blank spot in your the way that you were received due to the ignorance of one of our priests. Our synod made a decision in 1971 to receive everyone who comes to us through baptism, even Roman Catholics. And this priest knew better. He just didn't obey. And so they baptized me at Jordanville. A couple of weeks after I was baptized, one of the younger monks there, his name was Father Igor. Later on, he became Metropolitan Ilarion. But at that time, he was still a Rasifor monk with the name of Igor. And he said to me one day, would you like to go with me to town and help me do some errands? And I said, sure, I'm not doing anything. So we get in the car. Where the monastery property ends, there's a big cross by the at the end of the property. And we drove by that. I hadn't been off the monastery property since my baptism until this moment. We went by the cross, we made the sign of the cross, we were driving down the road, and I'm not really thinking of anything. And I look out the window and I see a family coming out of the front door and getting into the car. And I knew what I was seeing. I knew that these were people. I knew it was a family living in a house, which seemed odd to me, not living in a monastery, in a big building with everybody together. And I saw the trees and the flowers, and I knew what everything was. But somehow it seemed to me like I was seeing them in a new way, that I had never seen these things before. I started to notice that things that I could never understand from the Holy Scriptures were now understandable to me. And I would think like, well, of course it means this. I could not understand that before. I couldn't see it before. But those things started happening not after I was chrismated, but after I was baptized. Now, when I came out of the church, since Archbishop Andrei said, since the people had already seen me going to communion and everything, he told Father Ianiki to baptize me sort of privately so that nobody would be scandalized. But when I came out of the church after my baptism, a young man came up towards me. I thought he was going to congratulate me with being baptized. He was himself just recently graduated the year before from seminary, and now he was a professor in the seminary, and he was also the secretary of Bishop Loris. And he came up to me, and I thought he was going to congratulate me, but he says, no. He says, no. What you have just done now is a blasphemy. And I said, what do you mean a blasphemy? Well, what did I do? You were baptized a second time. And that is a sin against the Holy Spirit, which will not be forgiven in this world or the next. I said, what do you mean I was baptized twice? Once when you were an infant in the Catholic Church, and once now. You were baptized a second time. And that is a sin that will never, ever be forgiven. There's nothing you can do about that now. I understand you Americans. You find our church exotic and beautiful and so on, and you come here for that reason. But this place we Russians built for us. You shouldn't be coming here. This is just for us Russians. You like Orthodoxy, yes, I understand that, but it would be much better if you stayed in your Catholic Church or Protestant church and worked for the rapprochement of our churches from the other side, instead of coming over and trying to be Orthodox. You can never truly be Orthodox because you're not born Russian or Greek or something like that. And I thought to myself, I left Rome for this? I thought I had finally arrived at the center of Rocor, Jordanville. I thought I had come to the place where the most hard-line Orthodox people would be. That's exactly what I wanted. And here's a professor in the seminary who's telling me that my baptism as a Roman Catholic was valid. And that my baptism as an Orthodox, even though it was done with the blessing of Archbishop Andrei, was somehow sinful. Anyway, I was there a few months, and then I decided I'll go try out Boston Monastery. I was there for a few months. And then I decided at Boston, I met a young man from Germany who Archbishop Mark had sent. He was still an archimandrite at that time, but he sent this fella to Boston to get an idea of what monastic life was like, because they wanted to start a brotherhood in Wiesbaden, And so this young fella says to me, well, why don't you come to Wiesbaden and help us start this brotherhood? My grandmother was German. I know a little German. And so I asked Archbishop Paul if I could come over to Germany, and he said yes. So I went over there, and I stayed in Wiesbaden with this Father Mark, who later became Archbishop Mark. But I started having trouble with him too. He came into my room one time, and he saw in my icon corner I had icons of the royal family there, and he says, "Oh, what do you have those icons there in your icon corner? There you have to take those down." And I said, "But why? They're saints." He said, "They've never been canonized as saints." I said, "But they're martyrs. They don't have to be canonized. Martyrs for a political system, not for the faith of Christ." And he said a few other things which made me, about the OCA and so on, and about ecumenism. It made me very disappointed in that situation. I thought, well, I can't stay here with somebody who thinks like this. So I went back to the United States, and then I didn't know what to do. I got my job back at the Red Cross for a while, but I was traveling to Chicago every weekend to go to church up there. And I would drive on Saturday morning up to Chicago, which is about 4 hours away. I would go to all-night vigil and then sleep in my car. And then, because of a Volkswagen Beetle, and go to church in the morning and then go home. I did that a few times, and then Archbishop Seraphim there, he saw me, he was looking, who's this young fellow who's been coming to church? I came a few times. So finally he invited me to come for supper, and he wanted to know who I was, and I told him all my story and everything. And he says, "Okay, you get married and I'll make you a priest." And I thought, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, but I said, "Well, Vladika, I still think that I should become a monk, but I don't know. I tried it 3 places and it didn't work out, and I don't know any girls anyway." And he says, "Well, we've got girls here. We'll find you a girl." So then I didn't know what to do. So one of my friends from seminary, he said, "Well, you should go see Archbishop Andrei at Novodevayeva convent. He is the last disciple of the last Optina elder, Starets Nektari. And he is a person who can see into the future. He can see into men's hearts. And he can tell you exactly what you should do." And I was so miserable, I decided, okay, I'm going to drive out there, and whatever he tells me, whether I like it or not, or understand it or not, I'm going to take it as if it's from God. And I'll do whatever he tells me. So I went there, I told him my whole story, and at first he said to me, "Well, you should go back to Jordanville and finish the course of study there." I still didn't know Russian, and the classes were all done in Russian. But, I had been to Rome, and the classes were all in Italian, so, it wasn't that big of a change. I just had to learn another language, that's all. And by the time you get done, God will show you whether you should become a monk or get married and become a married priest. And I thought, gee, that's such simple advice. But I couldn't think of that myself. And so I said, "Thank you, Vladika, that's exactly what I'll do." And so we were chit-chatting for a while, and then all of a sudden, he was in this lazy boy chair. All of a sudden, he bolts up and he goes, No, now it's clear to me. You must get married and become a priest as quickly as possible." And I thought, wow, I wasn't expecting that. He says, "Can you move here?" I said, "Well, I have to give 2 weeks notice at my job, but yes, I can do that. He said, good. We can get the books from the seminary and we can go through the books together. I can tutor you, but I can give you something more than the seminary because I have all this pastoral experience and I can give that to you. The seminary can't give that to you. So I moved to Novotiveva. At first, I got a job working in a nursing home, the Russian nursing home at Tolstoy Farm. And after a while of working there, he said, I need somebody. He was an invalid, so he needed somebody to give him personal care. So he said, I want you to be my cell attendant, and you'll give me this personal care which I need, and I will tutor you for the priesthood. And we'll look for, I know all these ladies with granddaughters and so on, we'll find you somebody to get married to. So I lived there a couple of years. Lydica Filaret used to come there for confession. He went to confession to Archbishop Andrei. He had his own little house there that he used to stay in when he came. And every time he came, Lydica Andrei would present me to Metropolitan Filaret and let him know how my progress was going and so on. And finally, Lydica Andrei died, and my situation was left hanging, sort of. I didn't know what to do. The last day, the day before he died, he says to me, he's going to die tomorrow. Or actually, it was the morning. He died on St. Peter and Paul Day. So I sat with him during liturgy, and he said he's going to die today. And I said, Lydica, you can't die. What are we going to do without you? You know, my situation isn't finished yet. What am I going to do? You know, you can't die. But he says, well, I am going to die today. But anyway, well, what about me? Well, you know, that's all I could think about was myself. He says, well, he said, you're going to be a bishop in 25 years. And I said, well, if I'm going to be a bishop in 25 years, maybe I shouldn't bother getting married, you know. He said, no, you do what I tell you. Just wait for God's will. And I said, but, and he said, just wait for God's will. And then he died. So I thought, well, the people here don't want me to stay. And I stayed 40 days. That's the typical thing you do when somebody dies. You wait 40 days before you make any big changes. And but on the 40th day, I decided to leave. I went back home to get my job back at the Red Cross where I worked before, but they didn't have any openings at that time. And I couldn't really find a job. So I went up to Jordanville and asked Father Vladimir up there, what should I do? I thought I'd become a truck driver, maybe go to this truck driving school, or I had a few different ideas about what I should do, and one of them was joining the Air Force. And he said, I like that idea. That's a good idea. You join the Air Force. And so I joined the Air Force from Jordanville. I went into the recruiter's office in Syracuse in upstate New York, and they sent me down to Texas, and I was in the Air Force, you know, for 4 years. I signed up for 4 years. But after 1 year, my friend, who had become a priest by then, he knew that I was, you know, looking to get married so I could become a priest. So they put me in touch with this girl that his wife knew from the convent in Boston, and we started corresponding. She was living with her brother in upstate New York, and I was on the Air Force Base in Texas. So we started writing, and then we started talking on the phone, and we decided she wanted to be a nun. She had been in the convent in Greece for 3 years and then 2 years in Boston. But she had this illness called bipolar illness, and she couldn't become a nun. And they put her out. They told her brother to come and get her out of the convent because she couldn't become a nun with this disease. And She wanted to be a nun, but she couldn't, so she thought the next best thing would be to be the wife of a priest, and I needed to get married to become a priest. So we thought that we would serve God in this way. So her father said, "Well, don't you think you better meet this young man before you show up to get married? And what if you don't like him? So he paid to have her come on the Air Force Base. There's a little hotel there where guests can come. So she spent a couple of weeks there, and we spent a couple of weeks getting to know each other. And then we decided to go up and meet her folks. And they liked me so much that before I went, I had to go back to work Monday. I worked on the night shift. So I spent the weekend there, but on Monday morning, we went down to the courthouse, and the judge did a wedding for us, a marriage. And I took her to the Air Force Base and got her dependence card. She didn't have any health insurance, so that was kind of an important thing. And then they put me on the plane to go back to San Antonio so I could go to work that night. But then a month later, we got married in church, and then we started living together. So the first day after we got married, we drove up to Chicago because I wanted to tell Archbishop Seraphim that I finally got married. And but he wasn't there. He was at the summer residence at the lake. But Vladika Alipi was there. So I told Vladika Alipi, I said, well, I got married yesterday, and here's my wife, and he thought, great, so they're going to ordain me like the next Sunday. And he said, no, Vladika, I'm in the Air Force. I signed up for 4 years, and I've only served 1 year. But I work in manpower and personnel headquarters, and I know that if you write a certain kind of letter, they can let me out with an honorable discharge for humanitarian reasons. If you write a letter that I have this special training to be a priest, that it's unique, and you have a special need, they might let me out early. So he wrote the letter, and I gave it to my commanding officer, and they ran it through the process, and they said, okay, well, we'll let you out 1 year early, but not 3 years early. So I had to serve 2 more years. But then they did let me out one year early, and I was going to go to Chicago because I was from that diocese originally, and Archbishop Seraphim was the first bishop to offer me this. He wanted to make me a priest, and I thought I owed him that. And nobody wanted to go to that diocese. They had a hard time finding priests for that diocese. Everybody wanted to go to either the Eastern Diocese, where there were more Russian people, or the California Diocese, San Francisco, where they had more activity, more Russian people. But nobody wanted to go to the Midwest, and so I volunteered for that. But then it's kind of complicated, but it didn't work out. Vladika Alipi became afraid of ordaining me because one priest was Father Panteleimon from HTM. He heard that I was going to be made a priest, and he called up Vladika Alipi and told him, don't make him a priest, you'll regret it. And he said, well, why? Do you know something about him that's not good? He said, no, it's his wife. She before she became Orthodox, she was doing this transcendental meditation, and in Greece, when she got manic the first time, they didn't know what happened to her, but she had her first manic episode while she was in Greece, and she did some of these Hindu dances in church, apparently, from the time that she was doing this TM. She remembered that, and they thought she was demon possessed. That's why they brought her to Vladika Andrei to begin with, where we actually first met. But Vladika Andrei didn't think she was demon possessed. He just thought that she had a family illness because her mother was sick with it, her grandmother, and so on. And it was controllable by medicine, so he didn't think it was demon possession. Um, so anyway, Vladika Adipi was too frightened by what Father Panteleimon said, and I was kind of mad at Father Panteleimon because, we had all of our plans made. I sold my house already. I didn't have a job as of a certain date because they decided to let me out of the Air Force, and where was I going to go, and what was I going to do? I still had bills to pay, and I didn't have any income, and so on. And everything was all set for Chicago. We had our apartment already set up. We had a washer and dryer already ordered, and it was going to be delivered on such and such a day, and so on. And he says, well, I just can't. Vladika Adipi said, I just can't ordain you a priest. Maybe a deacon. I said, well, Vladika, if you wanted me to be a deacon, I would have just said, well, wait until I'm out of the Air Force. You don't really need a deacon. You can live without a deacon. The whole thing was that you wanted me to be a priest. He says, well, maybe, why don't you call Vladika Lavr? Maybe he needs a priest. So I called Vladika Lavr. And he says, oh, yeah, I remember you. Yeah, okay, I would like to make you a priest, but I'm getting ready to go to the Holy Land now on a pilgrimage, so call me in September when I get back. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do until September?
Yeah.
And he says, well, why don't you call Vladika Filaret? Maybe he needs somebody. So I called Vladika Filaret. I thought he had forgotten about me, But actually, I wrote him a letter. And he wrote back and he said, oh, yes, I remember you. I would like to have you in my diocese, but I want you to come up here to see you first. So I flew up there on a long weekend and did all the paperwork, and he said, okay, yes, I will ordain you as soon as you get out of the Air Force. So once I get out of the Air Force, they wanted me to come up to the New York area. And they had decided by then that I was going to be at the diocesan headquarters in Glen Cove on Long Island. Now, at the time that I came, Vladika Filaret was in California, and he didn't fly. He always took the train. It takes 5 days to get across the country by train.
Wow.
So I got up to New York area, and he asked Vladika Gregory to ordain me to the diaconate. And Vladika Gregory thought he ordained me to the diaconate on August 15th, New Style.
Is that Vladika Gregory Grabe?
Yeah. And he thought he would ordain me 4 days later on Transfiguration, but Vladika Filaret said, no, I want to ordain him personally. So he's going to have to wait until I get back from California. So he ordained me on Dormition in Novodevaya, which was their feast of their monastery. So he ordained me a priest in Novodevaya on Dormition, and they appointed me to serve in the diocesan headquarters. And I was living in Glen Cove. I did that for a couple of years. I was the priest there. I also served in Synod once a week. I also taught in the high school there a couple of days each week. And I ran the candle factory. I had 4 jobs. And I was administrator of diocesan properties. I was an officer of the diocese. And they had trouble with the parish in Rome at this time. We had to get somebody there like lickety-split, because the old priest who was there, he was giving away properties worth millions of dollars, just giving it away. And people were defrauding him, using him, and stealing from all the people in the parish and stuff. It was a really bad situation. And we had to find a priest for Rome. And at first they thought of me, but the other bishops of the synod said, no, we can't send him. First of all, he's too young, he's inexperienced, and he would be the obvious choice because he's already lived in Rome and he speaks Italian, but he teaches at the high school, he runs the candle factory, he's the administrator of diocesan property, and so we're going to have to find 4 priests to replace him here. So, but the situation got to be so bad that they finally had to send me to Rome because nobody else would go. And it was either that or we're going to lose that place. And if we lost the place in Rome, then we would lose all the parishes in Italy that sort of depended legally on that setup in Rome, the corporation in Rome. So anyway, that's how I ended up in Rome. And then Lydica Filaret died while I was in Europe. I was in Rome a couple of years, and then we had so much trouble there that I had to leave. It's just a long story. So since I was already in Europe, Archbishop Mark called up the synod and said, well, he's already in Europe, I need a priest badly. So since he's already here, could I have him? And they said, yeah. So I went to Munich for about 4 months, and then he sent me to Copenhagen, and I was in Copenhagen in Denmark for almost a year. You know, that's about the time Metropolitan Filaret died. And when he died, they kicked Bishop Gregory out of Synod building, and Metropolitan Vitali came in, and he made that statement that first Christmas after Metropolitan Filaret died, that ecumenism was no longer like under anathema, and that caused me a great amount of consternation. And I couldn't stay in the roll corps because it seemed to me, once they made that statement, that he began a process that was only going to end with their absorption by the Roman Catholic Church. And I was trying to get away from the Roman Catholic Church. I know what the Roman Catholic Church stands for. I know what they believe in. I know what they teach. I went to their seminaries, both in the United States and in Rome. There's no higher school to go to in the Roman Catholic world than the one I was in. So it's not like I was acting upon the words of some crackpot teacher someplace. I was in the school it was part of the Vatican. I had, you know, I had a permission, like a pass, you know, to get into the Vatican anytime I wanted to, because I was a student at the Vatican.
It was like the most prestigious school you can get into.
Yeah. So, and these Russians, they seem to want to join the Vatican. I mean, the Moscow Patriarchate had already joined the Vatican in 1969. In 1969, they made a deal with the Vatican that their people could take communion in each other's churches if they couldn't find their own churches. Like if somebody moved to the Soviet Union, they couldn't find a Catholic priest, they could take communion and confession and communion in a Russian Orthodox church. And the Russian Orthodox who was living in a Catholic country, and if he couldn't find a Russian Orthodox priest, he could go to the Roman Catholic Church for confession and communion. They made that decision in 1969. That's Eucharistic union. All right, it's under certain circumstances, with certain conditions, but they still recognized each other's sacraments. And I thought that was problematic, to say the least. After a year and a half after they made that decision, like 1970, 71, somewhere in there, the Polish Pope wrote a letter to the Patriarch of Moscow, who was Alexei II at that time, and he said to him, you know, we've got this agreement now. Why don't you close your parishes in Italy? and send your people to us to take care of. We'll take care of them. You don't need to have clergy in Italy anymore. And so they wrote a letter to their clergy that they had in Italy at the time and told them to close their churches down in anticipation of the great unification with the mother church, which they were looking forward to happening soon. I saw the letter.
Oh, wow.
They sent it to Father Marco Daviti in Bologna and Father Ambrogio Bozzo in Genoa. They were told by the exarch of the MP in Western Europe, Anthony Bloom, who lived in England at the time, to close their parishes down and go back to the mother church, meaning the Roman Church. Now, these people were originally Roman Catholics, and they were sick of the Roman Catholic Church, and they wanted to get away from it. That's why they came to the Orthodox Church to begin with.
And they got abandoned, essentially.
Yeah. So now I'm in the Roll Corps, and Metropolitan Philaret died, and they're starting to act like they're getting ready to join the MP, which is already, in my mind, in communion with the Roman Catholic Church, and I could not, I couldn't stay in this new Roll Corps.
Yeah.
Under those circumstances. So, to make a long story short, I ended up going with the Greeks for a while, for about 13 years. And ended up with Hokna. They were just getting started at that time. But then they abandoned the first bishop they had, which was Akakis of Diabria, and they went with Auxentius then, but I stayed with Father Anthony Gavalis, with Bishop Akakios, but after 2 years he dumped us, and then we had no bishop for a while, so we appealed to the Matthewites, and they sort of took us under their Omophorian, but secretly, because they were going through difficulties at the time, and they said, well, just wait, because we've got some schisms that we're trying to prevent, but after 5 years, they couldn't prevent them anyway, and so they finally took us in. So we were with the Matthewites for a couple of years. But then my wife started making trouble in our marriage. She had fallen in love with the dean at the college where she was teaching on Long Island, and they decided to divorce their spouses and marry. So she divorced me, took my kids. I had sole custody of them for 9 years. But she took my kids and left. So it was the 4th time that she left me. First 2 times we didn't have kids. The 3rd time we had the kids, but they were little, 2.5, and Barbie was only 6 weeks old when she left. But she always came back after she got over her episodes, But this time I thought she was having another episode, and I thought she'd be back, But she didn't come back. I waited 4 years.
Yeah.
And I started hearing rumors that she was married to somebody else, and I thought, well, how could that be? Because we were still I didn't know I was divorced. She hid it from me for 2.5 years. I didn't know I was divorced.
Oh, wow.
Legally. But we weren't divorced church-wise. So she got married to another guy while she was still married to me. So once I figured that out, I decided, well, I guess I'll become a monk. So I didn't exactly know where to go. But I ended up going to this monastery out in Colorado, which was at that time in Roac. That's why I came to Roac.
That, I think, from listening from the past is going to lead into the next question, which is how you how you came to Metropolitan Valentine.
Yeah, well, I had gone to this monastery in Colorado because it was in Roac, and I was living in Indiana with my mother and my sister. They were not very supportive of my religion. I could not dress as a priest, act as a priest, talk as a priest in front of them. I couldn't have any icons at home or any incense, or, you know, they didn't like that I was always fasting. If people called me on the phone to talk to me, even in other languages, they knew I was talking about religion. They didn't like that. Um, so I didn't know what to do. I just decided to add more prayers to my prayer rule, and I thought I would add. I heard that this Roac church had made Metropolitan Philaret a saint, and he's the bishop that ordained me. So I thought they might have an akathist, and I would add that akathist to my prayer rule. That's why I contacted this bishop in Colorado, Gregory. And I had known him at that point for about 25 years. I thought he was always crazy, but then I thought, well, okay, he's crazy, but he's got himself made a bishop, and he's got a monastery, and what do I have? You know, nothing. So I mean, I was going crazy in my situation. So I thought, well, maybe instead of criticizing him, I should just help him, you know. And so anyway, I asked him about the akathist, and they said he wanted to know he remembered me from before, and he invited me to come for 4 days to the monastery. But once I got there, they decided they liked me, and they immediately called up Russia and told the synod that they had a candidate for the episcopacy. He didn't even talk to me about joining Roac yet. I just went for 4 days.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm there 2 days, and he's already calling up Russia and telling them he's got a candidate for the episcopacy. So anyway, the 4 days came to an end, and I was getting ready to leave, and he said, "Well, what are you going to do when you get back to Indiana?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Well, why don't you stay here?" And I thought, well, yeah, I would like to stay here. So I stayed there. I called my mother and, you know, told her I was going to stay at the monastery. And didn't really surprise her. So I was there for about 6 months. And then Metropolitan Valentine came for a visit. And it was right after Pascha, I think. Anyway, we went to pick him up at the airport in Denver. He was white as a sheet. Denver is a mile up.
Yeah.
It's up in the mountains. And he had 3 bypasses 7 years prior in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And 2 of them were already blocked. Of course, we didn't know that, but he gets out of the plane so far up, he was having trouble breathing, and he was white as a sheet. He looked really bad. But we drove him back to the monastery, and we spent the whole day. People were asking him questions, and you know, I had to do all the translating because he couldn't speak English and nobody else could speak Russian. So about 11:30 at night, he goes to his room, and then we heard him pounding on the wall, and we come in, and he's having a heart attack. So we called this doctor that we knew in Florida, a Lebanese guy, And he said, call 911 immediately. He's having a heart attack. We didn't know exactly what was going on. But so we called an ambulance, and the ambulance took him to a local hospital. But when they heard about his history, they said, oh, this is way too complicated for us. You better take him to the heart center in Colorado Springs. So we drove to, it's 2 hours away. We drove in the ambulance 2 hours to Colorado Springs. And they immediately put dye into his bloodstream, and they showed me where the blockages were on the screen there. They had to show me because I had to explain everything to Lydica Valentine. And they said he needs bypass surgery now, or he's going to die. He's not going to live till morning. So they did the emergency surgery. They did 5 more bypasses. And I had to stay with him in the hospital. He was in intensive care for about 2 weeks. And then he started to get better. So they put him up on a normal ward. But once we got him up there, got him all situated and everything, he started going crazy. You know, he started like knocking his food off the tray and everything. And I didn't know what was going on, but the nurses did. He had a temperature of 107.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. What happened is he got a staphylococcus infection, because when they do the bypass surgery, they put in a catheter through the groin, and they didn't clean him well enough. And the staphylococcus bacteria is on your skin all the time, and it shouldn't be on your introduced into your internal,
organs.
Yeah. And apparently they didn't clean him well enough, and that area got infected, and he got this infection. And that was a really big thing that almost killed him. So they had to sew a catheter to his chest. One end of it went right into his heart, and the other end was hanging outside. And for the next 6 weeks, they trained me how to mix up his antibiotics in a bag and connect them to this catheter and put it on a stand, like an IV stand. And so I had to spend another 6 weeks with him while he was getting this antibiotic therapy. So that was about 2 months, the first 2 weeks, and then the next 6 weeks I was with him round the clock. And I was the only one he could talk to. So we got to know each other pretty well, and he decided, since Gregory had already presented me as a candidate for the episcopacy, he decided he wanted to make me a bishop, but not under Gregory's conditions, which were, he wanted me to be made a bishop, but he wanted me left as a monk in his monastery, so I would still have to be obedient to him. And he would send me out, the idea was he would send me out to the East Coast on the weekends, but I would spend the rest of the week in the monastery being his monk there. And Lydica Valentine said, no, I don't like that idea. I have a different thing in mind for you. But he did accept to make me a bishop at Gregory's petition, at his request. But when Gregory found out that he wasn't going to get his little plan, he had this plan that he would get me made a bishop and one more monk made a bishop, but then he would break off from ROAC and start his own jurisdiction. That was his plan all along. I didn't believe it, but that's apparently what was the truth. So when Lydica found out, Gregory didn't get his own way, he tried to prevent me from being made a bishop, prevent me from leaving the monastery, and started spreading all kinds of rumors about Metropolitan Valentine, how he stole a monk from the monastery and he was acting like a pope, and I mean, he was doing crazy things. So anyway, Metropolitan Valentine transferred me to come here and live here with Shishkovs. Father Vladimir Shishkov was the ROAC administrator at that time, but he was starting to fail his memory. And Metropolitan Valentine wanted me to come here and help Father Vladimir do his job as administrator of ROAC in the United States. That's why I was moved here. So that's how I came to be here. And after a couple of years, they made me a bishop.
Kind of another question, kind of on the same topic, which might not be as interesting, but how did you first come into contact with Metropolitan Theodore? Obviously, this would have been before he was Metropolitan, and how did that go?
Well, when I finally went to Russia to be made a bishop, he was one of the bishops there that took part in my consecration. So that's really when I met him for the first time.
Your time in Russia, I've heard some of your stories. If you have any specific you'd like to share, or kind of like the reason you can no longer go back, if you're comfortable with sharing. Just because I know some people haven't heard those before.
Yeah, well, I was made a bishop in 2006 on Vladika Theodore's name day in June. And as a member of the synod, I was going back and forth, quite a bit. I think in 2013, I went 5 times to Russia.
Oh, wow.
And in 2014, I went 3 or 4 times. One time I took Ilya with me to help me travel. And let's see. One time when I was there, they wanted to do an interview. One of the TV channels wanted to do an interview, and the other bishops didn't want to do the interview, so they put me up to do the interview. And they asked me a question about Putin, and I said something. I tried to say something complimentary about Putin that sort of didn't really mean much, but I thought he was a good leader for Russia at the time that he came around, because when he first appeared, Yeltsin was the president and the country was spiraling down into chaos. There were nuclear weapons lying all over the place with no supervision. The Americans were afraid they were going to be sold to terrorist groups. And so when Putin came in, I mean, the inflation was terrible. The place was, going to hell in a handbasket quickly. And Putin stopped that and started making Russia into a more or less normal country, which I thought was a good stabilizing influence. So I thought he was good at that time. Of course, it came at the expense of many democratic reforms, but at the time, it looked pretty bad for Russia. So Putin actually, I thought, did a good job. But I did say, because I was going every month at that time, I was going every month to Washington to take part in an international, it's sort of an informal group, an international roundtable on religious freedom. We usually met either in the State Department or in the White House or in the basement of the Capitol building, wherever a senator who was sponsoring our group could get us a room. That's where we would have our meetings. And I was, of course, speaking about the persecutions against our church done by the Russian government when they took our churches away from us, when they took the relics of the saints away from us, when they threatened our priests and so on, prevented us from registering parishes or dioceses, things like that. I was complaining about those things at this international round table. Some of that information was relayed to the United States government, and they used it in their diplomatic interactions with Russia. They produce a sort of report card every year on the progress of religious freedom and civil rights in different countries, and they give these countries like a grade, and on the basis of that grade, they either give or withhold aid, financial aid, and I don't think Russia was interested so much in the financial aid, but they did not like being called a primitive country when it comes to human rights.
Yeah.
So anyway, when this TV company came, they asked me as an American, what did I think about Putin? I said something complimentary about him. And what did I think about the new Russia and the situation and so on? And I simply said, well, you have, the Soviet Union was a signatory of the 1947 United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And they made a constitution. And the Soviet Union was one of the founding signatories of that constitution. And since the end of the Soviet Union and the beginning of the Russian Federation, your government announced that all of those treaties and agreements that they had made as the Soviet Union would be honored by the new Russian Federation. You wrote a new constitution in your country, and according to your constitution, just like in this Declaration of Human Rights, your citizens have the right to freedom of conscience. That's the way they say freedom of religion. In other words, people can choose to believe in God or not believe in God or change their belief, and the government is not supposed to persecute them for that. The government is supposed to protect the rights of their citizens, and it's not supposed to have any partiality to any religion. Our church is registered under Russian law like it's supposed to be, and yet they take properties away from us and relics of saints away from us to give them to the state church. And I said, I don't understand as an American why the people who belong to our church, who are Russian citizens, why don't they deserve to have their constitutional rights protected by the guarantor of your constitution, which is the president himself? Why is he taking things away from these citizens, our believers, and giving them to the Moscow Patriarchate, when they're supposed to be equal to all religions? That's the only thing I don't understand. And they put that on the TV news. So that, and the fact that I was going to these international freedom of religion meetings in Washington, they knew that. Because a couple of times I took Metropolitan with me, and we put the pictures up on the internet. And one time, Vladika Valentin, when he got back to Russia, was called into the president's office to give an account about why he was doing that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because they considered it to be treason. And anyway, the next time I came to Russia, it was, I think, in October or November of 2014. I was arrested at the airport, held in a jail cell, and deported the following morning. And I've never been allowed to return to Russia since that time. Then they wrote an article in the Vladimir city newspaper condemning me and Metropolitan Theodore and my godson Alexander Soldatov, who is the editor of Portal Coridoru, an important website reporting on religious news, all religious news, but not under the auspices of the state. He's independent.
Mhm.
So he was, until they ran him out of business. But they sued all three of us. I mean, they wrote this article about all three of us, claiming that we were traitors to the Russian government, that I was a CIA agent, that I was working for the State Department, I was smuggling millions of dollars into Russia to overthrow the Russian government, this kind of stuff. 53 accusations, false accusations in this article. So after this article appeared, we sued them. We sued the newspaper, the three of us. And they settled for giving us the same amount of space in the newspaper to write a rebuttal, which Alexander wrote. But then they tried me in absentia in their courts and declared me a religious extremist / terrorist. They said that contact with me, for if any Russian citizen has contact with me, it's dangerous for them and for Russia. And they even blocked my website from anybody in Russia trying to get it. They find a page that says that the Russian government can determine that this website is got some dangerous aspect to it, and they wouldn't let people connect to our website.
And that's ROAC USA.
Yeah. Anyway, I was still allowed to go to Russia when Metropolitan Valentine died, and the year after I went for the first year anniversary of his death to do a religious service. We also elected Metropolitan Theodore, the next chief hierarch of our church. I was there for that. But that at the end of 2014, that was the last time I was allowed to go to Russia. I haven't been allowed to come back.
Oh, wow. So, kind of going on the other extreme end of not being so serious, we were actually talking about this tonight, which I thought we would include in this. What hand is the hand that you should wear your wedding ring on?
Right hand.
And what's the reason?
That's what's written in the Trebnik. And in most of the world, except countries that are under English influence, everybody wears the wedding band on the right hand anyway. It's only in England and in countries like Australia or places like that are dependent on English culture, that they wear the wedding band on the left hand. Most people in the world wear the wedding band on the right hand. But in our Trebnik, which is the book the priest reads the marriage ceremony from, it specifically says the right hand.
Okay. I just found that interesting. I don't know, some people might not know that, so I'll include that in there. And the last thing I have is, if you could just give a message to the lay people in the South, just of any advice or...
Yeah, most of our young people in the United States now, they were brought in through the influence of Father Mark down in Louisiana, through that parish down there. Father Mark originally approached me 20 years ago because he belonged to some obscure, off-the-wall, supposedly Orthodox group, which wasn't. It was like a vagabond, what do you call it, vagante group. He was worried that he wasn't in the real Orthodox Church, and I spoke to him for about a year or so, answering his questions, and finally he decided to invite me to come down and get a good look at the situation, talk to this Bishop Joseph that he was with at the time. And I did. I came down, looked around. I did talk to them. He wanted to know what they would have to do in order to be accepted into our church. I told them. I told this Bishop Joseph, who was married, I said, you cannot be a married bishop in the Orthodox Church. You might be permitted to come over and be a married priest, but not a married bishop. So he was, I think, amenable to that, but his wife was not. And then they started persecuting Father Mark because he was more interested in coming to our church than staying with them. I told him what had to be done. He had to be baptized. He had to be ordained, everything all over again, because the group that he was with is not in the Orthodox Church. And he accepted all that. He started building his own parish there in his garage. And I would say he did a good job for 20 years. He made his own vestments, painted his own icons, built his own church, put his own books together. He did an admirable job because they wanted to belong to a real Orthodox church. They came looking for us. They wanted to be part of the Russian Orthodox Church, the real Russian Orthodox Church. Our church in Russia is mostly made up of people who were still in the catacombs. They never came out of the catacombs. About 2/3 of our people are still in the catacombs. We have about 100 parishes. We used to have more like 200, but over the last 20 years, many of them have disappeared, either because people died or because the government persecuted the priests and they didn't have the stomach for it and they went back to the MP. We still have about 100 parishes openly operating, but most of the people that we have are still in the catacombs. And Father Mark wanted to be in our church. And so even though they don't speak Russian or anything, he did everything I asked him to do, so I gave him his chance. But as time went by, I guess he took on this sort of anti-Russian prejudice against us. He did not seem interested in learning anything in Russian, doing things the Russian way, understanding our people, our church. He kept saying things like, I shouldn't have to learn anything in Russian. He wants to do everything in English and find customs that are not customs of our Russian Orthodox Church. So he's not trying to fit in with us. He's trying to make our church bend to his way of thinking, which I think finally led him to his decision of late to leave us all together and go to the GOCK, which is where he went. He didn't really give a good reason for why he wanted to leave us. From what I can tell, it boils down to his thinking that I have severe dementia. He even said that he would only stay if I would be replaced by the synod with another bishop, and that I had to go see a psychiatrist of his choosing before he would deign to stay in our church. But I told him that most of the young people coming to his church are people that found our church on the websites and on the internet, and they came to him because he was the closest priest of Roac to them. They wanted to be in the Russian church. Okay, they're Americans, they don't speak Russian or anything, but they're not against being with the Russian church. The Russian church outside of Russia, which is the church that I joined with Metropolitan Philaret and Bishop Gregory and so on, was well respected by the Orthodox people of that time in the world. It was considered to be the most legitimate, true, old calendarist Russian Orthodox church. All the Greeks in Greece and in other countries, Romanians, Serbians, if they wanted to find a real Orthodox episcopacy, as opposed to their ecumenical, new calendarist, modernistic groups that they were having to deal with, they would appeal to the Rocourt Church. And that's how our Roac Church got started, as part of the Rocourt Church. So we're sort of a continuation of that. But it seems to me that our position was a little bit too strict for him. He wants to be more open-minded. He wants to be in communion with larger groups of people. He doesn't seem to think that ecumenism is the horrible thing that we think it is. And so he's gone off to this group, which has a softer approach, I guess you could say. But the GOCK, I've known about them for many, many years. Metropolitan Philaret and Bishop Gregory did not accept the GOC. It wasn't called GOCK back then. It was just called the GOC. They did not accept them to be in communion with them. They were not antithetical. I mean, they were nice to them and everything, but they wouldn't serve with them. They didn't consider them to be truly Orthodox. Their representative back in those days was Metropolitan Petros, who was the uncle of Pavlos. And he was going to the OCA, the MP, the Greek New Calendarist Church, as well as the Old Calendarist churches. He would go everywhere. And this is exactly the thing that turned Metropolitan Philaret and Bishop Gregory off concerning him. Metropolitan Pavlos, his nephew, he became the next Archbishop of the GOC in America. And I remember when he was still an Archimandrite, and I was with Father Anthony Gavalis, and we were looking for a bishop. We were looking for a church organization to belong to. He was considering the GOC. And at that time, Archimandrite Pavlos gave an interview to the Kyrios Ethnikos, which means National Herald in Greek, newspaper. The reporter asked him what he thought about the Patriarch of Constantinople, and his answer was, "Oh, I love him. He's my true father. He's the true leader of Orthodoxy in the world," and things like that. And the reporter asked him, "Well, wait a minute. You're old calendarist, he's new calendarist. How does that work?" And his answer was, yes, these are difficult questions. That was his answer. And I told Father Anthony at that time, if you want to go join that, go right ahead, but I'm not going to join that. They give communion to new calendarists all the time. So many times that it's not worth documenting. It's so commonplace. They consider the new calendarist church to be somehow still in the Orthodox Church. That is the crux of Cyprianism. Our synod condemned Cyprianism in 2008 as a kind of crypto-ecumenism. And in 2014, when the GOCK went into communion, or actually absorbed the entire synod of the Cyprianites, and then lied to us that the Cyprianites had renounced their Cyprianism. They lied to us that these three bishops of the Hokna, Demetrios, Moses, and Sergius, were received into the GOCK by a prayer of confession. They told us that it was just a prayer of confession. It wasn't. It was a hierothesia, which is a second ordination. That's a violation of Apostolic Canon number 68. Might hurt their feelings. I don't want to hurt their feelings. But there's the fact. There's the canon. Canon number 68 of the Holy Apostles. Whoever receives a second ordination is to be deposed. And the one who does the ordination is to be deposed. Unless it can be shown that the first ordination was done by heretics, because heretics cannot do ordinations or baptisms or any other sacrament. So by leaving Hokna and going to the GOC and being received by hierothesia, They were basically saying that the Hokna was a heretical group. And I don't believe Hokna is a heretical group. They were in the Roll Corps for 20 years. We were all together in the same Roll Corps church for 20 years. They say their heresy is name worshiping, but they can't tell me what name worshiping is. I made a point of going up to visit Metropolitan Demetrius once when he asked me to come up. He wanted to talk to me about joining our churches together in one communion. And I asked him about this Cyprianism business because I was trying to figure it out for myself. What is it all about? I didn't know what the whole thing was about. He couldn't answer my questions. And when I kept pressing him on it, he started to raise his voice like he was annoyed. And I just changed the subject because I didn't want to have an argument with him. I was just trying to find out what's the deal with this Cyprianism. I mean, with this name worshiping business. I think that they just used that as an excuse to leave Hokna, claiming that they were some kind of heretics. As far as the Russian church is concerned, which is where this whole controversy sort of rose, the decision of the Russian church, the last word on it was made in 1914 by the Synod of Moscow, and they left it unresolved. They left it for the Sabor of 1917 to resolve, and it was on the agenda, but they didn't get a chance to make a final determination about it because the revolution interfered. And as far as Metropolitan Philaret, Bishop Gregory, Archbishop Baverki, Archbishop Seraphim of Chicago, many others, as far as they were concerned, this name worshiping thing is unresolved. That means you can think what you want to about it, and I can think what I want to about it, and it's not a basis for schismatic, separations. I don't understand, for example, they say that it's a heresy to glorify the name of God, and yet we do that all the time in the services. It's not a real reason. I think they just had some kind of a conflict with the hierarchy of the Hokna, and they wanted out, and they wanted to join a larger group, the GOC, and they just used this as a heresy to justify their leaving Hokna without a blessing, and it's not a heresy. It's never been declared a heresy by any legitimate synod. They're so assiduous on this issue. But then you ask them about the violation of apostolic canon number 68, that doesn't matter to them. Why does this so-called heresy, which isn't a heresy, so important to them, but canon 68 is not? What about canon 31? They took a priest from me without a letter of recommendation, without a letter of release. That's a violation of an apostolic canon. Are they going to say that our church is heretical and they didn't need a letter of release? That is what they're saying. But if that's true, then why did they receive Father Mark without reordaining him and without re-baptizing him? Canon 68 says, whoever receives a second ordination is to be deposed unless it can be shown that the first ordination was done by heretics, because heretics cannot do ordinations or baptisms. So if they take a priest from me, claiming that he was never properly ordained or baptized because he was coming from a heretical group, Why did they take him in without baptizing him and ordaining him themselves? Isn't that the very essence of Cyprianism?
Yes.
They say Cyprianism is a moot point, doesn't exist anymore, and it never really existed anyway. They're lying. They're lying to us, and they're lying to themselves. And they're lying to all their people and our people. Now, I think God has given us all a free will. Who am I to take it away from anybody? You want to come to our church? Fine, I'll help you. You want to leave? Fine. Bye-bye. It's up to you. There are consequences, though, to your actions. And when Father Mark first joined our church 20 years ago, he didn't ask me about what our relationship was with the GOC. He didn't mention them at all. He was quite happy to be accepted back then. So why is it now all of a sudden a prerequisite for staying in our church if we recognize the GOC or not? Or any other church for that matter. He seemed to be very upset because I couldn't say what other synod we were in communion with, that we recognize as being Orthodox. But then neither can his new bishop, right? He says the same thing that I said.
Yeah, in this recent interview with Subdeacon Nectarius. Now, something else, while we're on this topic, I want to bring up, if you're not comfortable with answering it, just say so. There was a claim made by him as, he's always let me commune these GOCK people. Who are the people that you have given a blessing to, not only with the GOCK, but obviously, Augustine coming from the GOCM, and I think Zoe with Hoffna. Who were the people that you specifically given a blessing to, and the others? Well, yeah, the only people that you've given a blessing to take communion at St. Peter's, outside of ROAC.
Yeah, I gave permission for Timothy 20 years ago when Father Mark was just getting started. He introduced me to this Timothy. Timothy had a very sort of pitiful experience, situation there with his mother and his aunt and his house and his job and his health and everything. He didn't have a place to go to church. He impressed me as being a nice, pious young fella, interested in the faith and well educated and so on. And this was before they joined up with the Cyprianites. And so I gave permission for Timothy to receive communion in our parish as a sort of an economia or a condescension to his state. Father Mark believed, as he told me, that if we would be lenient with Timothy on this, that he believed that Timothy would eventually become one of the members of our parish. And so I gave him permission. That does not mean that I gave a blanket permission for everybody in the GOC to take communion in our church. He says that I gave him permission to give communion to some people in the prison. The only people I gave permission for that was for people that were that belonged to the Hochna, as a sort of a favor to Metropolitan Gregory in Boston, because they couldn't always come down and give these people communion, and they asked if Father Mark could do that since he had lived down there. They asked him, and I said yes. I do not remember him asking me for permission to commune people that belong to the GOC in prison. And as far as any other parishioners are concerned, I may or may not have given permission, but he didn't ask me.
I was going to bring up, it's something I need to show you just to verify that it's legit. But when I was talking with the ex-parishioner at St. St. Peter's now with the GSAK. I'm not gonna name him. He sent me an email, and it was from Dimitri, not from Demetrius, but it was a letter that was signed by you stating, I give Father Mark so and so permission to go commune these people from the GSAK for Metropolitan Demetrius. I just wanted to bring that up because it could just be like, you know, you don't remember, or it could be a forged document. So that's why I need to show that to you.
I don't remember. It's not a sign that I have dementia.
I'm not trying to imply that.
Because, first of all, that's not the proper way of going about doing that. Metropolitan Gregory asked me first if I would be okay with Father Mark going and giving communion to these people. Metropolitan Demetrius never contacted me to ask me the same, favor. He did not ask me. And it's not proper for Father Mark to take that upon himself to decide or to work it out with them without getting me involved, talking to Metropolitan Demetrius.
Yes, because from what I was told, because at the time I was like, I don't think he did that. He said Demetrius reached out to Father Mark and asked him this. Father Mark was like, oh, I have to ask Bleak Andre for a blessing, and then that's where that letter comes into place.
Well,
so
I don't believe...
I was never told he reached out to you to begin with.
Yeah, well, if he did, then Father Mark should have said to Metropolitan Demetrius, you should contact Archbishop Andrei. Not Father Mark contact me, but Metropolitan Demetrius contact me, which he never did. That's the proper way of doing this kind of a thing. And like I said before, they lied to us that the people who used to be in the Cyprianite Synod had repented of their Cyprianism. I was under the impression that they did. I only recently found out that that was a lie. I only recently found out that these three bishops, Demetrius, Moses, and Sergius, received a second ordination. They were received into the GOC by reordination, not by rebaptism. So my question is, how can it be, if they're already bishops, that their episcopal consecrations are not valid, but their baptisms are?
Yeah.
Isn't that Cyprianism? How can that be? I mean, we make fun of Metropolitan Agafangel, who says that the Moscow Patriarchate has 6 valid sacraments, and that the Roman Catholics, Old Believers, Monophysites, and some Protestants have valid sacraments, but he was sure that our church did not have valid sacraments. We make fun of him for saying that the Moscow Patriarchy can have 6 valid sacraments, but not a valid Eucharist. But what difference is there between that and them saying that the consecration of the episcopacy can be invalid, but the baptism is valid?
Yeah, because it all happens in the divine liturgy.
It's all the same. Either they have all the sacraments or they don't have any of them. You can't have one sacrament and none of the others. You either have all the sacraments or you have none of them. If you have one, you have all. If you don't have one, you don't have any. That's the way it works. Otherwise, it's Cyprianism. Now, our church put an anathema on Cyprianism in 2008. In 2014, this GOC went into communion. They absorbed the Cyprianite Synod, which did not, as it turns out, reject the premises of Cyprianism. I decided to wait a little bit to see if that were really true. And finally, Metropolitan Theodore and I decided that we had to clamp down on this a little bit. That's our prerogative as bishops running our church. And Father Mark says that I've come to some new conclusion, some new idea, some new position. It's not a new position. 2008 is when our synod made the anathema against Cyprianism.
So would you say from the time of the union with the absorption of the union, the synod and resistance, that it was kind of in like a gray area as y'all were watching to see if what was said was true? Because we never had established a communion, right? It was just
Well, yes, we didn't establish communion, but it doesn't mean that just because we're not in communion with somebody, it doesn't mean that we think that they're not in the church, like the Synod of Metropolitan Macarius, for example, the Synod of Hokna. I'm not aware of any reason why I should not consider them to be legitimate Orthodox churches, whereas with the GOCK I am.
Mm-hmm.
If I find out that either the Hokna group or the Synod of Metropolitan Macarius is guilty of some canonical infraction, I may change my mind about whether or not we can let somebody like Augustine have communion in our church.
And just to go back to that point, I just want to verify this because these claims have been brought out. The only people, to my knowledge, which correct me if I'm mistaken, that you specifically gave permission to receive communion was Augustine from the GOCM, Timotheos pre Synod of Resistance Union, and Zoe from Hofna.
Yeah.
Those are the only three. So everybody else, you did not specifically give a blessing to.
Right.
Okay.
Well, there was a period of time when Metropolitan Theodore and Vladika Trofim and myself, after meeting with Metropolitan Gregory in Georgia, not the United States Georgia, but the Georgia overseas, we decided that we would allow our lay people to receive confession and communion in each other's churches. Metropolitan Theodore was not ready for priests or bishops to be serving together for another reason that it doesn't have anything to do with this conversation. But he did allow for our lay people to take confession and communion in each other's churches if they couldn't. Like we have people that live far away from our churches that live close by a Hokna parish, or vice versa. So there was a period of time when we allowed that. But something happened last year, another unrelated thing, and I rescinded that decision with Metropolitan Theodore's knowledge and blessing.
Which there's nothing wrong with that canonically, to my knowledge.
No, I rescinded that decision, but it doesn't mean that I consider that synod to be devoid of grace and outside the Orthodox Church. There are many reasons why we might break communion. For example, St. Paul and St. Barnabas, who were school chums, grew up together, studied together, became Christian apostles together, preached together, but they had a contention at one point, and they parted ways, and they never served with each other again. They're both saints, but they stopped having communion with each other. Same thing is true here. There are things that people do sometimes that are unruly. They break certain canons, and we are commanded by the canons not to have communion with these people. Doesn't mean that their whole synod is devoid of grace. I don't consider that all of Hokna is without grace, but Metropolitan Gregory did something that I cannot abide, and my response was to break communion, this limited communion that we had with them.
Yeah. So I guess the last thing, to kind of end it on a good note, what are some words of encouragement on a broad scale that you could give to the people in the South that might be are going through these kind of trying times?
Well, I would say Orthodox people, look around. Look around at what's going on in the world. It seems to me, there are many prophecies floating around about the end of the world. A lot of them, I think, are misunderstood. Maybe some of them are bogus. We don't know if these things pertain to our time or not. But there are two prophecies in particular that I look to that are said to us by our Lord himself. He said that when the Son of Man comes the second time, will he find faith on the earth? We live at a time, like he said, when he comes the second time, it'll be a time like it was during the days of Noah and during the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. What does that mean? The time of Noah was a time of almost universal apostasy. Only 8 believers were left in the true God at the time of Noah. The Lord put them in the ark and saved them from the flood, which washed away all the filth of unbelief from the earth. Are we not now in another time like that, where there are very few people left who maintain the one true faith in the one true God?
Yeah.
The other prophecy that the Lord himself spoke about was it will be like it was in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. Look around. Do you think that could be applied to the society that we live in now? I think that today we accept things as commonplace that they could not even dream about in Sodom and Gomorrah. They could never dream about a boy becoming a girl or a girl becoming a boy. Yet today we have medicines and surgeries where we try to do that very thing. This is beyond what they were doing in Sodom and Gomorrah. And many people across this country and Europe and who knows where else, even if they're not homosexuals themselves, they will say something like, well, I don't believe in it myself. I'm not a homosexual. But if these two people are in love with each other, they should be allowed to love each other and have families and live together and do what they want and have their rights and so on. And I think it's not right to say that it's proper, that it's okay to do something which God has prohibited. I don't think that's the right thing to do. We might not have any way of controlling it, but at the very least, we have to say it's not right because it's prohibited by God. It's prohibited by biology. Sexual relations are for the purpose of procreating. The male member is made for the female member. It's obvious to anybody who has a precursory knowledge of anatomy and biology. It does the female organ doesn't make any sense without the male organ, and vice versa. You cannot get a child out of 2 men or 2 women. That you cannot make a child that way. You need a male and a female. Biology itself dictates that. So I would say, are the prophecies of Jesus Christ himself being fulfilled around us right now? Look around. Are you waiting for some big catastrophes? They've already happened. The 20th century is one big catastrophe after another one.
That is true.
You could say they're already fulfilled. Are you waiting for Elias to come and Enoch? Is it Enoch or Enos? I can't remember. The Lord himself said, because the apostles asked him, why does it say that Elias must come first? And the Lord said, and I tell you that Elias has already come, and they did to him whatever they wanted to. And the apostles understood that he was talking about St. John the Baptist. So if you're waiting for Elias to come, and the Lord is saying he already came, maybe we're the ones who are not understanding. Oh, well, that was 2,000 years ago. Okay, for us it's 2,000 years, but for the Lord, 1,000 years is like one day. Right? So Look around and see what's going on in the world. Where is the true faith? We believe it's the Orthodox faith. Okay, so who's Orthodox today? Who today is preaching what the apostles preached? Who today is keeping the apostolic canons, or trying to? Are people who say, oh, the 68th canon doesn't matter. The 31st canon, it doesn't matter. The 30th canon, it doesn't matter. Are those the people you want to entrust your souls to? They're trying to rebuild some old empires to make themselves, wealthy and happy and make a golden age of orthodoxy? No, the time is short. Many of the prophecies that were spoken to us about the horrible things that have to happen, they're already fulfilled. And the Lord said, and yet the end is not yet. It'll be a day when nobody's expecting it, when men are least expecting it, when people are going about their normal everyday business, buying and selling, marrying and giving in marriage. It'll be a day when two men will be working out in the field, one will be taken, one will be left. Two women will be washing their clothes at the river, and one will be taken and one will be left. Two men will be working on a roof, one will be taken and one will be left. We have this thing amongst Americans, especially. You want to make some Orthodox church which incorporates your imagined traditions that have been lost for more than 1,000 years. You want to reconstitute some Western rite or something. No, Orthodoxy survived into our time in the Russian Orthodox Church, basically. Even the Greeks turned to the Russian Orthodox Church when they ran out of bishops. All these synods in Greece all trace their episcopal ordinations back to the Russians of the Roll Corps. I'm not saying you have to learn Russian, but I think, imagine the people of New Guinea, that like to run around with bones in their noses, eating other people and so on.
Yeah.
Imagine British missionaries coming there in the 19th century and saying, okay, you people of New Guinea, we're going to civilize you, we're going to bring you into the British Empire, but you have to learn, first of all, to wear clothes. You have to learn to keep to your own wife. You have to learn not to eat other people. You have to take these bones out of your noses. You have to wear some clothes. You have to have high tea at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You have to learn how to speak English. You have to go to school. You have to go to our church. You have to be baptized. Can you imagine New Guinea people saying, okay, yes, we'll accept Christianity, but we still want to keep our New Guinea customs because those are our traditions. We're not English. So yes, we'll accept the gospel. We'll accept that, but we're not going to eat. We're not going to speak your language. We're not going to drink your tea. We're not going to stop eating each other. We're not going to stop visiting each other's wives whenever we feel like it. Can you imagine what kind of a situation? Are these people really becoming Christian? Isn't their pride about their own traditions and their own selves getting in the way? Americans are not used to being second to anybody. We're used to being first in the world in everything. First in space. We invented electricity. We invented television. We invented the cars. Whatever. We're used to being the best and the foremost in the world. But when it comes to religion, we're not. We have to humble ourselves and learn from somebody else. Look at the people in Alaska. In the 19th century, 18th century, 19th century, they learned Orthodoxy from Russian missionaries. At the time, Alaska was not part of the United States, it was part of Russia. They tried to learn as much as they could from the Russians. Many of them never learned how to speak Russian. But today, you go up there, they still wear the scarves. The women wear the scarves like the Russian women. They wear skirts like Russian women. The men wear the same kind of shirts that Russian men wore 200 years ago. They incorporated as much as they could from these Russian missionaries. They made an alphabet for them. They started writing books for them. They never had any books in their own language before. They translated the services into their own language, okay. But they sing them according to the Russian music they learned from these Russian missionaries, because with their hearts, they adopted everything they could from their Russian teachers. And I think there's value in that, because along with learning things that you think are mundane, you learn things that are more important. And you absorb everything that it means to be Orthodox. Being Orthodox means we live a certain way, we dress a certain way, we eat a certain way, we behave a certain way. We have customs that are Orthodox. We learn from our Orthodox fathers and from the Russians that we don't have in the West. It's not because we want to be like Russians, it's because we want to be like Orthodox, and these people were Orthodox. Instead of saying where we're different and stressing our differences and saying we have a right to these things because we have an Orthodox past, our Orthodox ancestors died out 1,000 years ago. There's no living tradition that has come down to us in the West of Orthodoxy. We have to learn Orthodoxy now from the people who have brought it into the 21st century, that is the Russians. And it's still alive in Russia, mostly in the catacombs, where people are constantly living in fear of being arrested and defrauded, robbed of what they have for the sake of their faith. And we love and respect and honor them for that, and we try and emulate them and learn from them and incorporate what they have to teach us into our own lives here. We will, of course, continue to do some things the way we do them in America anyway. But we should try to absorb as much as we can from those people who have Orthodoxy to teach us, to give to us. Learn everything we can from them. Emulate them in everything that we can. Do everything like they do. And when the Lord sees that kind of humility, He will give us that same grace. But He resists the prideful. He stands far away from prideful people. He abandons them after a certain amount of time. Like we just witnessed down there in Abita Springs, didn't we? I over the last 50, 60 years that I've been Orthodox, I've seen many American boys come through, like Jordanville and so on, seminary. I'm just going to learn the Orthodox part and leave the Russian stuff behind. I don't want to learn their language. I don't want to learn how the language they pray in. I don't want to learn the music. I don't want to learn anything else. I just want to take out the Orthodox part. And I have to say about 90% of them that I have known ended up losing Orthodoxy. They didn't hang on. I very nearly joined them in that. The one thing that helped me, I think, was that I learned their language. And that gave me the opportunity to talk to people like Archbishop Andrei, Metropolitan Philaret. Bishop Gregory could speak English, but I never spoke English with him. I always spoke Russian with him. And others. Vladika Verki didn't speak any English. The Vicar Seraphim in Chicago, I never heard him speak English. I never heard Vicar Alipi speak English.
Metropolitan Valentine as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I learned a lot from these people, owing to the fact that I was able to speak their language. And I think that's ultimately what helped me stay Orthodox when I went through the same temptations that everybody else went through. So my advice is, say your prayers, do your fasting, go to church when you have the opportunity to go. Come together and join together. Metropolitan Valentine grew up in a catacomb community. His father was a World War II pilot. He came home from war with no arms and no legs. Just a torso and a head. They called up his mother and said, come and pick up your husband. He can't stay in the hospital anymore. There's nothing more we can do for him. Now this woman, who was looking for this man to work and provide for her and her child, now she's got to be 24/7 caretaker for this man. He had no arms, no legs. He couldn't do anything for himself. She went crazy. She became an alcoholic. Ludica Valentine was 9 years old. He was adopted sort of by an older lady who was a catacomb Christian. And he was raised in that kind of a community. He said they got together every night and said their prayers. They saw a priest once a year. Once a year. But they said their prayers every night. That's the key, my brothers and sisters. That kind of dedication, that kind of faith, that kind of patience. Eventually, he grew up, the Soviet Union ended, he became a clergyman, he became a metropolitan. He made it possible for people in other countries to become Orthodox. Those are our fathers in the faith that God has given us to emulate. Read the epistle that we read every time we have a feast of a great hierarch. What does it say? Remember your elders and learn from them, having seen the outcome of their lives. Someday when we die and we're all gathered before the throne of Christ at the second coming, at the last judgment, we're going to see these fathers. And they're going to look at us and they're going to say one of two things. Either they're going to say, oh, you're here. Good. Come over here and stand with us. You kept what we gave you. You incorporated it into your lives. You were loyal to it. You kept it. Or they're going to say, what did you not understand? We preached for you. We traveled for you. We wrote for you. You saw how God preserved our relics whole and incorrupt after we died. You saw everything about our lives. What did you not understand? You wanted to go be with these people over there? Okay, so go be with them now. You don't get to stand with us now. I believe that's what we're going to experience in the future. Now, what do you want to hear? Do you want to hear, come and stand with us? You kept what we gave you? The Lord himself said, in that day many will come and say, Lord, I have done wonderful things. I have cast out demons. I healed the sick, and I raised the dead. But I will say to them, he says, indeed, I never knew you. Depart from me. He said that, not me. How can you say you didn't expect that? You don't know that.
Yeah.
It's a miracle, I think, that anybody would find us and dedicate himself to Orthodoxy because of us. But it happens every day. People contact me from all over the world. They're interested in our church. They find us through the internet usually, or by word of mouth from people, talking and so on. From all kinds of places you wouldn't even imagine. Ask and you shall receive. You asked, you received. Now hold on to it. Grab it. Hug it. Keep it close to you. Live it. Suffer for it. Die for it. And you will live forever.
Well, I very much appreciate your time with this, Vladika, for being able to speak with me.
You're welcome.